Marriage is like a two-egg omelet. Once the two eggs are scrambled together and one omelet is formed, then if the two eggs want to separate, the couple wants to separate, how do they separate? All you can do is cut the omelet in half, but you know each person is taking a bit of the other person with them. And this is what Jesus meant when he said, the two have become one flesh. See, there is no way if you separate, are you really separating permanently from the person that you divorced? It's not going to happen. Because in the end, you're still going to be connected with children. And as long as you have children, that connection will be there until one of you passes away. You'll always end up having to pay child support. And even when the child support is over, then you're going to be attending their weddings, their parties. You're going to be there with the other ex. So in reality, you cannot separate. And this is why Jesus was telling the Pharisees, you think you can simply separate and that just ends a marriage. He says it doesn't, because you're still having connection with the former spouse. This is why Jesus taught the permanency of marriage. He says, don't get a divorce unless there's marital unfaithfulness. And this shocked the Pharisees. And you know what the Pharisees did? They said, wait a minute, but Moses said that we can give a certificate of divorce. But what did Jesus say? Haven't you read that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female? He's saying to them, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives, but he's not the inventor of marriage. God is. So one of the most important things you have to recognize about marriage is God invented it. It's from his mind. Look at human history. There's nowhere in human history that someone can point to and say there was civilization without marriage. It just didn't exist. In fact, every civilization, every nation, they all have marriage, and no one can point to when it began. You know why? Because it's always been part of the human race. That's the Bible puts it this way, that God took Adam and he brought Eve together, and God performed a marriage in the Garden of Eden. And from that very beginning, the human race has always been married. Therefore, since God is the one who brings us together, he's the one that unites us, then we need to go to God to find out how to conduct marriage. You know, a car manufacturer, they have a manual. Why? Because they created that car. See, cars were not invented by God, but God did invent marriage. But my point is this, you go to the manual that the car manufacturer gives to know how to handle the car. And they will give you commandments in that manual. Here's what you should do. They might give you a few suggestions, but they'll give you mostly, this is what you do and this is what you don't do. That's what the manual's about, because they know what makes the car work well. Friend, only God knows how a marriage is supposed to run. That's why we have to go what? To God's word to discover how to conduct a marriage. When I first taught on marriage, I was about 21, 22 years old. Our church had just begun. And when I taught on marriage, a 40-year-old man came and said, how can you, being so young, you haven't even been married for 2 years, tell me, I've been married for 20 years, how can you tell me how to live? Well, I'm sure many people had that idea. But can I tell you, I've been now married to the same woman for 41 years. So it's worked, but it's worked because all I taught them was what God said. You're right, I didn't have experience. I couldn't give them any experience, but I could give them God's word. And Jesus said, what God has joined together, let man not separate. And he told us there's no cause for separation except for sexual unfaithfulness. And he's saying you work things out. This is the best way to live a life of blessing. One final point I want to share with you. Not only did God create marriage, not only does he regulate it, but he blesses it when you commit to it. Jesus' first miracle was what? He turned water into wine. Wine symbolizes joy. When the joy in a marriage runs out, if you will turn to the Lord, he will give you more joy. You know, 2/3 of couples that describe themselves as unhappy, they got happier within 5 years. Because if you learn to persevere and work your problems out, you'll find the joy will return again. This is the teaching and concept by God. In Genesis 1:28, it says, God blessed them and said, be fruitful. Notice the blessing was in response to their marriage. God blesses marriage. Jesus' first miracle was at a wedding because he wanted to show how much he honors marriage. So if you have a mentality that marriage is not that important, listen to me, you got the wrong mentality. Because in God's sight, marriage is very important. It's the most important covenant that you will ever make with another human being. Most important, because it has lasting consequences. You'll have children that will have children, and your name will still be here. Your family will still be here when you're long gone. But that's not true of buying a house, a car, furniture. They'll all be gone, but not children. Can you not see how valuable marriage is? And I urge you, friend, try to make your marriage work out. I know it's hard sometimes, but with God's grace, he can pour that wine into you and give you that joy. But you got to be willing to forgive. You got to be willing to adjust. You got to be willing to submit to God. And you need to look at God's commandments and say, God, we're going to do what you said in your word to do. And when you make that commitment, you'll be like Sonia and I. 40 years from now, you'll still be married and you'll be happy about it.